The mules are in the corral. Welcome to Mule Talk, and I'm Cindy K. Roberts, your host.
And my sidekick, our author, TV personality, and world-renowned mule trainer, Meredith Hodges of the Lucky 3 Ranch. All right, Meredith, we're back on, and what are we going to be talking about today?
We're going to be talking about how good basic training includes common sense. Common sense seems to be kind of an elusive thing these days. Kind of rare, because our whole world is so sped up, and we're in such a hurry to get things done, we often don't think about the consequences of our actions. So I kind of want to go over things and give people something to think about, more than anything, because we want people to enjoy their animals and get the most from their animals and have the most fun doing it. My grandmother said a lot of things when I was growing up that made a lot of sense. She was one who knew every old saying there was, and a lot of people didn't think they were true, but I have found that those things that she was saying, you couldn't really know the meaning of them until you had the experience.
Always listen to Grandma.
And the one of the most important things she said, besides telling me I was going to be a sorry old woman if I didn't learn good posture and good manners, was that you can catch more flies with sugar than you can with vinegar. Now, a lot of people ask me, they say, is training a mule any different than training horses? In my estimation, not really. They're smarter than horses, so they learn things quicker and they learn things more consistently and they don't forget, kind of like elephants. The other thing that people want to know is, do animals even have feelings? You know, are we just training them to be our mount, train with a purpose so they have a job? Nobody ever told them that they needed to have a job, first of all.
Right.
Their job.
Good point.
Yeah, their job is just being who they are. And we can learn a lot from that. But I did ask myself this question a long time ago. Are they different from training a horse? The mules are half donkey and half horse. And donkeys are very sensitive animals requiring infinite patience and understanding. They do possess a natural willingness to please, which is evident when they're approached properly during training. And they often exhibit incredibly resistant behaviors when they're not approached properly. My finding is both mules and donkeys, they always need to be given clear verbal communication and body language so they can comprehend exactly what we're asking of them. As for do they have feelings, we grow up with the idea that these mules and donkeys are incredibly tough compared to horses. But that doesn't mean that they aren't sensitive. I mean, you can see a fly land on them and they can flick it off with a quick movement of their muscles. But the other thing is, do they have emotional feelings? And I learned that they do, undeniably, when maybe CT was one of my greatest athletes, and she was so willing to do everything for me and everything, and we had a really great relationship. But during the winter, when there was snow on the ground, her mama colicked. She was in a different barn, so I was walking her in the driveway in the middle of a snowstorm, and I decided it might be better to go ahead and just lead her in the indoor arena. So we were going down through the barn, and the mare just locked up on me right in front of Bee's stall. And I couldn't get her to go, and I didn't have anybody to help me get her all the way to the arena. So I opened Bee's stall, and I let her out. And she got in behind her mother, and she started pushing while I was pulling the mare into the indoor arena. When we got there, the mare was really badly colicked, and she just couldn't hardly walk, and she went down to her knees, and then she fell over on her side, and she died right there.
Oh.
And I looked up across the mare's body, and Bee was standing there with her head over her mama's haunches. And there were tears running down her eyes. And she looked so, so sad because she knew that she had lost her mama. Got down on my knees to make sure the mare was dead. I got up and I went back to where Bee was standing, and I put my arms around her and I said, I am so sorry. And Bee wrapped her head and her neck around me, and we mourned for her mother right there and then. And at that moment, I knew that everything that I had ever done in training that I felt bad about, I felt 10 times worse, because I knew that mule had just strength, it just gone through it with strength and hope that I would get a little bit more educated about what I was doing. And I did eventually, but it took a long, long time, because I kind of thought, oh, they're so stoic. They don't feel pain the same way we do. That night, I learned that they do.
Sure.
They most definitely do.
Yeah.
And a lot of the things that we've done, you know, we've watched wild Mustangs and other horses in the movies being trained and bucked out and blindfolded. And we always were led to believe that that's what you had to do, because these animals were dangerous, they were vicious. We were led to believe a lot of things that simply were not true. Then later on, I learned too, and you know, after learning all this stuff in the movies and watching these cowboys buck out these guys, and then you know, watching the horse trainers, how they trained, and they went on the road, and they were a lot more mild-mannered than the old-fashioned in the West movies I had watched. So I thought, well, okay, they're, you know, we're learning to be, you know, take a more gentle approach. And that was when I learned, too, about how the Indians used to train their animals for buffalo hunting. And they weren't bucking them out like the cowboys did. The Indians were a whole lot more respectful, and they laid their bodies over the horses bareback, you know, and let them move around with them on their back, and giving them the opportunity to learn to balance the rider only by laying across their backs. And then they would slowly get their legs over their backs. And a lot of this, if it was done with any kind of bridle at all, it was a war bridle. It was just a rope that went around their head and into their mouth, but they didn't really use it. They kind of let the animal get used to them, and they got used to each other together. So I think they had a much more, less exciting, if you will, interaction with their animals. We thought that the old cowboy method was rough, so the new cowboy methods in comparison were more mild-mannered. And then our cowboys started using ropes in the round pen. They got obedience from them going around and learning to lead by a foot, learning to be roped, and chasing them around. Well, my estimation, mules are so much smarter than horses are anyway, that they learn what you teach them. And they learn, oh, here's an engaged game here we're playing. They're roping me, and they're roping me by the foot, and they want me to be led by the foot. So I guess I'll do that. When we're doing all this stuff, and especially with mules, they're learning exactly what we're teaching them. So things are really kind of hyped up. I don't think trainers that do those kinds of things are thinking about the person that animal is going to go to in the end. These trainers have a lot of strength, a lot of agility, and a lot of knowledge and a lot of gimmicks they use to trick these animals into doing what they want. These are tricks that the owner that this animal is going to may not necessarily know or be able to implement. So the end result and the behavior, the obedient behavior that the trainer gets from the equine is not necessarily going to transfer to the owner.
That is the correct answer.
And what will happen is these animals that are trained this way, they'll start their defensive behaviors, and the owner is fearful when they start to do that. And they don't know how to respond to an animal that's not doing what they're supposed to do, especially if they have been supposedly trained. What happens then is this animal has been quick trained most of the time because people are in a hurry to get them trained. And so they want to get it done in 30, 60, 90 days. But they don't realize that an animal that is trained in that least amount of time may be cheaper, but you're not going to get an animal that's completely reliable by training that way. We had some trainers that recognized this as these trainers were being brought up, like John Lyons, Buck Brannaman, and a lot of others that used the rope tricks. Monty Roberts and Richard Shrake understood that it takes time to bond with these animals. My God, Monty sat there out in the prairie waiting for the wild horses to come to him.
Yeah.
And he was the original horse whisperer, and he taught me a lot. I read his books. When Richard Shrake was doing a clinic at Monty's farm in Solvang, California, got to go out there and experience a lot of Monty's techniques out there that were being done by his proteges. Monty wasn't there at the time I was out there, and I was sorry I didn't get a chance to meet him. But I knew about his approach, and I respect it, and I respect Richard. Richard was so funny. He called me up, and he goes, I'm doing a clinic out at Monty Roberts Ranch, and we need you to come here. Monty's proteges are having a little trouble. We got a horse named Boomer that's in the round pen, and none of us can catch him. It's a solid-sided round pen, and all he's doing is running around in circles every time anybody gets in there. I says, well, have you tried the crimped oats reward? And he goes, yeah, but he doesn't trust us.
Uh-oh.
I said, well, that will sometimes happen when you're trying a quicker method. And so I flew out there, and I brought my fanny pack of oats with me. And I walked into that round pen, and it was me and Boomer. And I said, Boomer, you really don't want to stay in here. I said, let's just get this done. So why don't you come over here? Well, of course, I was somebody that he hadn't met yet. So he thought, well, this lady's pretty okay. And you know, you see a lot of cases where these trainers have to admit that they're having trouble with these mules and horses and stuff sometimes. And they're just amazed when their kids and their wives can go out there and get along with these animals. Well, there's a reason for it. We kind of know what that is. If you're taking things slowly and you're not posing a threat, then of course the animals are going to bond with you. Even when I was doing reining training years before, I was told that you save those hard slides for the competition. And when you're training the sliding stop, you just make sure it's balanced. And then when you ask for it in competition, you're going to get those real slides. But if you're practicing and drilling on those hard slides, the animal gets sore. They get tired of drilling. They get sore from it. And then eventually they don't want to do it. And I think even the people in the military that were training war horses way back when, granted they probably bucked them out like our American cowboys do and have been doing in the past, not doing it so much anymore. When they did do that, they were looking at these horses in a way to turn them over and sell them. And that's what those auction dealers were doing way back when, too, that hired these cowboys to buck out these horses, to put them in the auctions, to turn them over for money. When you have the goal of selling and money forefront in your mind, you forget about actually training the animal and getting them to be a reliable mount. And so historically, the horses that were trained for war in Europe and Asia, I think they probably learned this same lesson pretty early. And they went to training them like they do at the Spanish Riding School of Vienna, where the horses are now trained more effectively, taking a slower method and using a method where the horses are much more obedient, and the movements that they do are used to protect their rider in a war. If they have the enemy coming at them in front, they can do a levade and sit on their haunches with their rider, and they're blocking the enemy with their bodies. So there's, even though it's technically dressage, the whole thing, dressage only means training, and that is training the horse in a slow and meticulous way so that he learns how to be obedient to his rider and how to protect his rider. When they were actually bucking horses out to turn them over for cash, they're actually creating a war with the equine before you even get started. And then they escalate the war by using forceful techniques that are not necessarily founded in common sense. Why reinforce behaviors in the equine that could arise later and get you in trouble if the equine gets aggravated? For instance, why use a rope halter with a knot at the throat latch that could pull so tight that you can't even take off the halter without fumbling with it and causing anxiety in the equine? And why use a halter that he can feel pressure on his face where the knots are that supposedly give you leverage, and it might take less time in the short term to get him to follow you? You've actually taught him that halter is going to put pressure on him, and eventually, if he wants to, he can rear up and take off and jerk that lead rope right out of your hand. But if you use a halter that's comfortable on his face, then he can learn to go with you through the reward system and learn to like it, and no more chasing in the pen or anything like that. And why give him so much slack with the lead rope when he can throw a temper tantrum on the end of it and keep you away from him if he's tied up by kicking and biting and spinning around like that? When I start one that's like that, and believe me, I've had several rescues that have come through here, and the mini mule is the worst. Frances is absolutely the worst that I have had, and she's the smallest. I learned right away that she wasn't going to go for a rope halter, too much slack there for her to move around in. And so I put her in a nylon woven halter that fit her face. You can get them to accept the halter, and sometimes they're so far gone that they are not going to come up to you if you just stand there. And if you reach for them and try to put the halter on, they're going to take off and run. So you can't use the conventional method with them. So what I did with Frances and a few others that I've had that were like her is I go ahead and put them in the stall and shut the door. And then I stand there, and of course I don't want to get kicked. So the first thing I want them to do is to face me. So I tell them that's what I want you to do. So I start out, and I've got the halter with me hanging on my arm, and I'll go face me. And they'll have their face to the corner, and then they'll run down the wall to the next corner and run around me in a circle and keep going from corner to corner. And then if I try to block them, then they'll go back and do the same thing the other way. I figure that that's the kind of behavior I'm going to get. Then I just keep moving with them and trying to stay in front of them and keep them in that one corner. So if they're going to the left, I move to the left. If they're going to the right, I move to the right. If they won't stop that running back and forth, then I reach a point where I just grab the lead rope, which is a soft cotton rope. I do not use the whip with these kind of animals. And I just sling that halter rope, keeping my distance out of kicking range, and smack them on the rump with the end of the lead rope. It's kind of the difference between a beating and a spanking. And at the same time, I say, face me. And then I wait for them to turn around and look at me. And then I go, and when they do, which they will, they'll go, oh, what happened? And they'll look at me, and I'll go, that's right. Now come here. I'm going to come up to you, and I'll take a step forward. And then, of course, they go right back into the back forth thing. So I take my step back. And then while they're doing that, if they're still doing it, then I go ahead and block them to the left, block them to the right. And I'll do that for just a couple of times back and forth. And then I'll take the end of that lead rope and I'll smack them on the butt with it again. And I'll go, face me. And then they'll look at me and they'll take the step forward. If they stay looking at me, then I'll take another step forward and I will extend my hand with the oats. Now, they've been fed the oats, and so they know what they are. They know from seeing me give them to other animals that they're good, they're a good thing. And then eventually they will let me saddle up to them and feed them the oats, and I'm still kind of back in and close to their bodies, because they can only wield a really good kick and hurt you if they got a little bit of distance to do it with. If you're riding against the hip, they'll push against you if they're going to start that back and forth stuff. And if they do, then you just step back out of range again and repeat that whole thing over again. Eventually, they will let you come up the side and go ahead and you just reach over the neck, down by their chest, and leave the halter down low. You reach over and keep a left hand on the left side of the halter. Reach over and grab the crown strap with your right hand. So now you've got your arms around them. So if they try to pull away, you can pull it up tight. Keep them close to you so that if they do pull, they're pulling you with them. If they just will not stop, then let loose with your right hand, let the halter drop, and then start over again until they let you bring that halter, the noseband part of the halter, up over their nose and put the halter on. And then you can give them some more oats, and you just stand there and stroke them. And just don't try to move right away. Just wait. And it might be even smart at that point, once you've got the halter so it's on their face, then don't even buckle it. Just take it off and leave and come back on the next lesson and repeat it until they're not tense when you're doing it. When they're not tense anymore, then you can buckle the halter. But I advise you not to put the halter through the crown strap, through the buckle. Because when you're done and you've had an opportunity to lead them around the stall a little bit, just take a couple steps, then you got to take that halter off. And you have to do it from the same position you were in when you put it on. That means your right hand has to be over the neck. That means the left hand has to be in the lead rope and ready to go back up to the halter. And so what you do is you just kind of creep your right hand on the other side up the neck, and they're used to it because you've put that strap into that buckle. So now you just creep with your hand up to that strap, and you unbuckle it with one hand while the other hand is on the same side of their face, but it's on the noseband. So you're basically in the same position, but you're just doing little steps. Then if they try to turn their neck to the right, if you're on the left and they try to turn their head to the right, once you've got that buckle undone, you can slide your hand down their face just behind the cheek with maybe your fingers on the cheek and the palm of your hand on the side of their neck, and keep them from turning their head and jerking away. Just stop them from doing that, because they'll only try it once. And if they run into your hand and it's holding their head straight ahead, then you can hold them with their head straight ahead and then immediately drop the noseband off and let go. So that they just go, oh, you let me loose. I didn't have to push into you. And that's what you want them to do. And you may have to do that 50 to 100 times unbuckling that way before they will stop turning their head into you like that and trying to get away. But, if you do that, then finally, they're thinking the halter's not such a bad thing. And you don't get into that chasing thing. It yields a better result in the long run. But, see, that's how these guys are because they're very sensitive. And we think that, if we put the saddle on and they didn't do anything, then we could just put it on and then try to get on and throw too much at them at once. But if you do that, it upsets the animal because things are moving too fast.
Yeah.
And they don't have a time to process what you're really doing. And you're not really explaining. And then when you get caught in doing these smaller steps because you think they're ready for the next step when they're really not, then you get caught in the issue of these guys aren't born in good posture. So everything they're doing to avoid you, to compromise, defend themselves against you, are done out of good posture. So they're moving muscles the wrong way, and they're probably creating soreness in their bodies. So when you get done with them, they're sore, and that's what they remember. And this is what shortcuts to training. It seems to create more negative behaviors that will have to be addressed and overcome later. You can go through a lot of these shorter methods, get results, and be able to ride and everything. But then, there's that one day when this one noise, maybe it's a skid loader driving by the arena, or maybe it's a balloon from a birthday party flying by you, or a paper sack blowing in the wind, across. If you don't take the time to introduce all these things in the groundwork stage on the lead rope and explain to them what correct behavior is, just stop, look, and listen to mommy, then they learn how to calm down quickly when you take that approach. But when you just throw these things at them, then they think it's something to be afraid of, and that's what they remember. And so when you're riding later on, then they just blow up because there's that hole, quote unquote, in their training. If they're going to be solid, they need these introductions. And they need very meticulous and detailed introductions. That's why it's so important that the owner participates in the training with the trainer.
That is the correct answer.
Because the mule needs to know that you both have his best interest at heart. When you are training your equine for saddle or driving, you need to spend adequate time conditioning those muscles correctly in good posture so that he won't get sore after his lessons, so that he's building his muscles up as slowly as you do when you're training. When you're going to the gym and, you don't just get out there and do a bunch of things and go, oh, look at all this machinery. I think I'll try them all.
No.
or if you're going to run, I think I'll do 5 miles today with a 50-foot or a 50-pound pack on my back. You know what you're going to feel like the next day if you do. In order for things to happen as effortlessly as possible, the equine needs strength and coordination built in good posture and a clear understanding of what's expected of him. That way, the consequences are going to be positive. Since these equines, their bodies are built with cartilage and muscle and tendons and ligaments, and when they're young, the young equine's bones are primarily cartilage, and they're not hardened until approximately 3 to 5 years old. And so you don't want to be doing hard things with them, because then they will develop asymmetrically, which also creates soreness in their body. And as it hardens into cartilage, it starts creating arthritis, and that can start at a very, very early age. And that's why it's good to go ahead and take the time it takes perfecting your leading technique every time you have him on the lead line. That means from the time you take him from the stall until the time you take him back. So you lead with his head at your shoulder, and you have him stay at your shoulder. You keep the lead rope in your left hand if you're on the left side instead of the right hand, so you have a lot of slack in that lead rope so he can use his own self-carriage to build his posture. Because if you're pulling on that lead rope with every step you take, you're going to be pulling him off balance. The balance is with his head and his neck. And he needs to keep his body straight all the way from head to tail. And you need to walk with gradual arcs, not abrupt turns, straight lines and all of that kind of stuff, in order for the core to be developed symmetrically around his bones. And it's just like a baby first needs to learn to crawl before he can walk. He's got to get his balance in that position first, because that's where he's most supported at that age. If he was just to stand up and walk and fall down, then he would be a mess by the time he was an adult. So, just take these things in that kind of a mindset that you are developing his body more than anything during training and trying to get it balanced so that he does all his movements with equal weight over all 4 feet. That when he does his turns, he's keeping that equal weight over all 4 feet in a balanced fashion, and he's bending through his torso to the arcs of the turns that he's doing. These things will all translate into much better performance later. You need to keep attention to your own body posture while you're doing this. And oddly enough, this is a great exercise for you too, and it's better than going to the gym because you're prepping yourself to be able to ride your animal. And as you're walking with that lead rope in your left hand, you'll be pointing in the direction of travel with your right hand. You will be looking straight ahead as to where you are going, and he will sense any turns that you're going to make by watching your head turn into that gradual turn. You're doing body language you don't even know that you're doing. And then when you get him started, you say his name to get attention. He has a name. We all respond to our names. And then we can listen to what people are telling us. So it's important that you say his name and then say walk on. And when you do, you look down to see what foot he's leading with, and you lead with the same foot, and you match him step for step. Then he realizes you're not going to take off and be the leader and drag him God knows where. This is all very predictable, very routine, and very polite and considerate communication. And when you stop, you don't just abruptly stop, you walk into a stop. When you halt, you walk along and you come to a halt and you say, and, giving him the heads up, something's coming, whoa. And then you take that second step and you bring your back foot back even with your front foot and you stop. And you give him time to stop. And then you give him a second to settle and then turn to his shoulder and square him up. Whenever you're practicing turning, always turn the equine away from you. Make turns gradual, not abrupt. Keep the steps with the front legs, and make sure that when you have gone into a turn that you've taken that step forward first, so that when he goes into the turn, he's crossing over with his front legs and not getting behind, which will make the turn abrupt and difficult for him to bend through his torso in order to execute it. These are things that come up in the hourglass pattern when you're doing this hourglass through these cones and making these turns with their stops in strategic places for halts and squaring up and changing the arcs of the turns and all of that. It helps you to execute more detail when you're doing all these things. And paying attention to the detail will improve the animal's body conditioning, his good posture, his balance, and most of all, his attention to your requests. Equines, and especially mules, will learn exactly what you teach them and will only be as meticulous as you are. To build good habits, to facilitate good equine posture, and to maintain your equine's full attention, routinely lead your animal in the manner I have described. Always give him a few seconds before each move to prepare for the next move. The result is a relaxed, compliant, and confident equine. As he gains strength, you'll notice that he now carries his body differently. He's more balanced, solid, steady. He's able to stop squarely at every whoa. You won't have to set him up. And when you watch him in the field, you'll notice the dramatic changes in his play patterns. Everything he does will be much more balanced and a lot less awkward. These are the kind of movements you're going to want for performance. And you might ask, okay, well, I'm doing this hourglass pattern on the lead line. How do I know when this stage of training has been sufficient and it's time to move on to the next stage? Well, when you can drop the lead rope over his neck and not hold on to it at all anymore, and he follows you faithfully in good posture through the flat work and the hourglass pattern, the halts and everything, then he's ready to add coordination to the mix by leading through obstacles the same way. Because the beauty of the approach is it's routine. It's not creating a war with your equine. He may balk at the obstacles at first, but there is a way to do that even in a calm and deliberate manner. He's already learned to follow you on the lead rope, so the chances of him pulling back on you and bolting and running are slim to none. So if he doesn't like an object in an obstacle course, you just stop where you are, square him up, go ahead, give him his oats, and then instead of asking him to walk on, you just move, keep your tension on the lead rope a little bit, and then move out to the end of it to get closer to the object, and then ask him to come to you. If he's, oh, I can't do that, you just look at him and go, oh, you can. You've done a lot of things, and you know you can. You just don't remember it. And besides which, you're forgetting one thing. I got the fanny pack, and remember what's in the fanny pack? And you reach in there and you show him the oats. And then you just stand there. If he still wants to move backwards, go with him. Just move backwards and go with him. And then tell him, well, we can go backwards if you want, but you're not going to get any oats unless you come forward.
That is the correct answer.
We've moved back a little ways. Now you have to come forward. And you just negotiate with him that way. And he will come forward. And you just inch your way to each obstacle the same way, using the same thing, and doing the same kind of leading training that you've always done. You go ahead and keep trying to get into position. If he still wants to stay away from something, you just inch your way to it. And it may be that you have to take those 2 or 3 steps forward on one lesson just to get him closer to the object. But that's a win. You want to land on a good note. They always tell you, land on a good note. Well, that's a good note. So if you don't feel that he's going to do anything else but get tenser again, stop the lesson right there. Get into your leading position and lead him back to the pen and take it up the next time. We have all the time in the world. If you try to take shortcuts with these things, you escalate the possibility and the risk of getting hurt. Either you will or he will, because you will engage in a fight, and the fight may end up with one of the two of you getting hurt or both. And it certainly won't help his attitude towards you. He will get sour on his lessons, and he won't like it, and he won't like being with you. And if you think about it, isn't that the way we feel when people are treating us that way? I mean, if you're a little apprehensive about getting on a carnival ride, for instance, Isn't it better if your friend doesn't push you into it, doesn't drag you into this thing, and then you get on it and you're scared to death on this roller coaster because you didn't expect it. And all of a sudden you're stuck, and you get off and you go, I'm never doing that again. I never want to do that again. But if your friend tells you, no, it's not as bad as you think, they're going to put a bar in front of you, and you can hold on to the bar if you want to. You can close your eyes if you want to so you don't see what's going to happen, and he kind of explains it to you. And then if he lets you sit there and watch it for a while, you kind of get diffused. And then if you do get on it, you still have the option of not doing it at all. You still got that too. In that case, you just avoid it. So if you're out on a trail ride and there's a really steep hill, look for another alternate route if you don't think that's going to be acceptable to your mule. Find the other way around, because it's probably going to be more dangerous to go over the edge than it would be to just find another more easy, way to get around this. And maybe sometime later you can try the difficult way. After you're both more confident, after you're both more athletically conditioned, and it would be safer to try to do it that way. You kind of got to think. And this thinking process is called discovering common sense. You need to discover the common sense in everything that you're doing with your mule. Now, trust is really important too, and there's another element of trust that's really important. And they will tell you how important it is, for instance, that you imprint your foals to get them used to human contact. But what they don't tell you is that imprinting a foal doesn't mean that contact they've had for that few minutes after birth is going to take them for the rest of their life. When we speak of imprinting in the scientific sense, it's referring to the way the brain processes input. The brain compartmentalizes impressions, images. The animal reacts to the stimulus that the image produces. A collection of imprints and images produces memories. Imprinting training with a foal of any breed will give him a jump start on his life with human beings because he's processing these images. It doesn't matter if your equine is a young foal or an older animal, he needs imprint training throughout his life, because this sets the stage for all the different situations that he's going to be met with. And he's going to create images and memories, and the way he relates to humans are going to be the result of all of these interactions with his humans. And the imprinting stimulates all 5 of his senses: touch, hearing, taste, smell, and sight. So when we're training, we should keep these things in mind too. We know he has feelings. I told you about that. He just doesn't show them all the time. A lot of men are that way too. They don't overtly cry like we women do. They're taught to stand up and be a man and keep it to yourself. Well, animals are kind of the same way, and they keep a lot of things internally until they finally blow. And if you know this can happen, then you want to think about how to keep them from blowing by addressing their feelings. And their feelings come from their 5 senses. And it leaves an indelible impression on your equine's brain as to how you expect him to behave. And over time and with repetition, it will become his natural way of responding. So think of imprinting as an ongoing process throughout his training. He needs this. He needs to, the most important sensation you can expose your equine to is touch. If your touch is gentle and considerate, it'll feel good to him. and he'll be interested in your attention. Learning how he needs to be touched is important because things won't go smoothly if you're touching him the way you want to touch him. For instance, a lot of people will go, if they're not familiar with equines, will go out and slam them on the head or pat them on the neck, and they do it a little too hard. Or if they pet them, they run their hand up and down, which is against the grain of the hair. And when it's going the wrong way, it doesn't feel very good. And so the equine is taking all of his cues from your hands, your legs, and other aids. So you got to make sure that those things feel good to him. Anytime you touch him, it feels good. That's why when you're in the saddle, it's important how your seat is placed on his back. It denotes your consideration of him through touch. The wrong kind of touch, no matter how slight, can be a trigger for adverse behaviors. When you get on, you sit down carefully. When you place your legs, don't jam them into the stirrups just to get your heels down. That's what they told us to do. But in dressage training, I learned how important it was to keep contact with your animal's sides. And so when you get up there, you want to be riding a balanced seat. And granted, when you're doing a sliding stop or jumping, you're going to have to lift your toes up and jam your heels down towards his forearms because you're going to be jerked out of your balanced position. So you got to kind of brace against it a little bit. You keep those legs on his sides so that when you're doing the cues with your legs, they're not coming out of nowhere. I don't have to wear spurs anymore. I determined that those are not really, they're not really necessary for bulky behavior because if the animal is able to perform an action, he probably will with a simple nudge from your heel. And even when I did my training videos, I encourage people to use blunt spurs because there are animals that are a little bit lazy, but you don't have to gouge them. You don't have to gig them. And most of the time, these spurs are just something that really looks really cool on our boots.
Well, they make a really nice looking accessory item to your wardrobe, but that's the only thing that I found out where they really worked.
You're absolutely right, Cindy. And if you're going to want to add them to your wardrobe, then make sure you know how to control them.
Right. Don't squat with your spurs on.
Exactly. There you go. You don't like it in your butt and they don't like it on their sides. So if you're going to wear spurs for the accessory, keep them off his sides as much as possible. And you can do that by sitting in your balanced seat where the spurs are actually parallel to his torso and not on an angle to gouge him. So you can still wear them. Sit in your balanced position. And instead of thinking of things in terms of pushing your heels down, which automatically rotates your ankle and puts your foot in the wrong position, think of it as pulling your toes up. Because if you do that, then you can keep that parallel to his sides without gouging him. And so the right kind of touch and the right kind of meticulous movements that you do, it produces pleasure in your equine. It gives him a willingness to perform in a positive way every time you interact with him. You pay attention to the way his hair lays and stroke his coat in that direction only. There's more fatty tissue over the neck and over the back, so you can press a little harder than you can over the bony areas. Going with the hair and using the flat of your hand and learning how to gauge how much pressure you can apply to the fatty areas. And then as you work your way down to where the fatty tissue becomes thinner, you learn to ease up on that pressure over the more bony areas. This is all a matter of practice when you're grooming, when you're training. This is really important because your reactions will help him, and it'll help you learn how he likes to be touched, And it'll instill trust in him and confidence that you're not going to hurt him. And pay attention to the different tack and equipment that you're using and the severity of the brushes. For instance, I've found that most of the grooming that I do, especially when they're shedding, can be done with those plastic human hair brushes. They got little balls on the end of those bristles that don't hurt. Shedding blades that are designed to get the mud off of them and get the hair out of them don't really do that because the teeth on those shedding blades are really kind of shallow. So when you stroke the hair with one of those, what happens is it takes the hair that's already coming out on the top off, but then it also breaks off the healthy hair and creates split ends. And then the hair becomes unhealthy. So I generally just use the shedding blade. If they've got mud on them, I'll just go to the spots where the mud is, starting at the bottom of the mud in the direction the hair is going and working my way up because it comes out easier from the bottom where, the ends of the hair than it does if you start up at the top where the hair is anchored in the skin. Kind of like brushing your own hair. It's easier if you start at the end and work your way up than trying to start at the top and work your way through the knots that are in the middle of the hair.
Right.
That's common sense. Again, we're talking about common sense. And your equine is going to be communicating with his body language as you're doing this stuff. So if he winces, that means let up on it. But I just go ahead and get rid of the mud that way, and then when I go ahead and I will go and do the manes and tails and sprinkle baby oil in them, and I do mean sprinkle it, don't douse it. People are afraid that baby oil is going to make the hair too greasy and then it's going to collect dirt and all of that. It actually protects it against it if you don't use too much. And you go ahead and sprinkle a mane and tail and then comb it with that hairbrush, and that makes it easier to get through the knots in the manes and tails. And the other thing it does, which is really nice, people have been looking for something that will keep these animals from chewing on each other's manes and tails because they love mutual grooming. And then a lot of animals will end up with very short tails and chunks out of their manes and stuff. But if you use Johnson's baby oil, they don't like that and they stay away from it. And then once you've done that with your hairbrush, then your hairbrush is a little bit oily. So when you go over the body with it, it catches those hairs a lot deeper against the skin that are ready to come out during shedding season. It takes the hair out much better than a shedding blade does.
Wow.
Especially donkey hair that's really long. And if you do that, I haven't even had to do it weekly. I got so many animals, and I get so busy sometimes it's more like every 2 weeks that I end up grooming my animals. But during shedding season, I find that it keeps that hair really, really healthy. And it stands up on end, and in the spring when the weather is changing and it's getting cold and then hot and rainy and then not, that hair standing up can do its job of insulating them from heat and cold because it's healthy. It's healthy hair. And you don't get that shedding buildup that you do when you're just going over the top of them with a shedding blade or one of those metal things that just circular metal grooming tools that they charge you an arm and a leg for, and you don't even really need a dandy brush or anything. Nothing's more frustrating than getting your animal all groomed up and then going over them with a dandy brush for the next to the last step and then a nice soft finishing brush, and they're all nice and shiny, and you turn them back in the pen and they roll.
There you go.
So why do those last two steps with those two soft brushes? They're going to get rid of that anyway, and the only time it makes sense to do that is if you're showing, because you got all the dirt off of them, and that's what grooming's all about anyway. That's common sense. You know they're going to roll. You know that after all that work you did, you're going to feel bad about it. If they do it right in front of you, you're going to hate it. Don't go that far with your grooming. Just do the important stuff that keeps their hair coat healthy and keeps them happy. And the other thing, when you're doing all of this imprinting stuff, your voice is another sense that's very important to them. And so it's really important that your tone is soothing and encouraging, and don't be afraid to talk in a sillier voice, because that alleviates stress. Don't their voices sound kind of silly sometimes? They have silly voices, so if you're always talking in a low monotone voice and everything, they're going to think you're up to something. They're going to think you're up to something. But if they're reacting to something and you go, "Oh, you didn't like that," well, maybe I better do something different. They're going to go, "Oh, she's being silly again. Okay." She's talking my language. And then it's okay. That's another way you can be encouraging and soothing. Quite frankly, people that are too together and too serious all the time, I get real suspicious of them. I don't know if you do, but I do.
That is the correct answer.
Oh, yeah.
And my mules do, too. They don't like them either. I used to interview people that wanted to work for me by putting them in the indoor arena with Sundowner. He could tell if they were going to be a decent mule person or not, because he would snort and run away from them.
Oh, boy.
And then they go, "Oh, whoa, whoa, whoa." He knew what they were really about.
Yep.
You can't be afraid to be yourself. Be yourself with these guys. Be real with them, And baby talk, we do it with kids. We do it with our children. Even Daddy does it with the children.
Good
and if
point.
they're going to grow up to be healthy kids, you got to do baby talk. And you got to do baby talk with long hairs, too. They love it. They absolutely do. Now, the other thing is we do need to create boundaries with them. And the tone of your voice can convey your disapproval before you even have to touch them to make a correction. You give them the opportunity to straighten up before you actually need to apply the physical backup. It's like when I was talking about getting a halter on a different animal and only doing a spanking with a cotton lead rope instead of a beating with a whip. I only want their attention as long as it takes to get their attention and get them back into their good manners. We want to minimize negative reinforcement as much as we can. That's why if they come after me and try to bite me or try to get into the fanny pack for the oats before they've been invited, I will take the palm of my hand and slap them right across the side of their face and then turn it over like a stop sign right in front of their face. And the first thing they do is throw their head up in the air and swing it sideways like they're going to leave. And with this attitude of, "Oh, no, you hit me. How dare you? I'm leaving." And that's when you reach in your fanny pack and you take a step forward and you extend your hand with the oats and you go, "Well, thank you for giving me my space. Would you like some of this?" Then they turn back and go, "Oh, what are you doing?" "Oh, okay, I see what you mean. I kind of came on to you a little strong, didn't I?" "Yeah, I'll take some oats." And they... So there again, you've negotiated. And you've limited the time of the negative reinforcement. It came, it went. These animals have an incredible sense of smell. They can smell things. They can smell danger from miles and miles away. My animals, I've observed them being in the turnout pens up here by the house. And a half a mile away, a bear will be walking across the hayfield, and they know it's there. They don't have to see it, but they all start snorting and running around in a circle. And I go out there and I go, "All right, you guys, I'll get my binoculars out to see what the hell they're spooking at." And even when we have people on tours, they can smell who's nice and who isn't. And they will warm up to people that smell good to them. And that doesn't mean putting on perfume.
Right.
I mean, they like oats. And if you've been wallowing in the oats and giving rewards, you're going to smell really good to them. But you know what else smells really good to them? Is if you just clean the barn and you smell like manure.
Yeah.
Right?
There you go.
Yeah. And so another thing, too, another sense they have is their sense of taste. And that kind of goes without explaining a whole lot, except that when I was talking to Richard Shrake, and he was explaining to me how we always look for the horse being comfortable in his work by waiting for him to lick and chew. And I said, well, Richard, how about just giving him a handful of oats? Doesn't that come a lot faster that way? He goes, well, Meredith, I think you might have a point there, you know. And so that's being prompt with the reward system and looking for things that you can reward. And when your equine's five senses are truly pleased, the very sight of you will prompt the memories and impressions on his brain that you've instilled in him during imprinting. The impression you've left with him is positive, encouraging, kind, considerate, and respectful, and his reactions to you will be positive and willing. Desensitization does not mean you want your equine to become totally desensitized to you, that you just don't want him to jump out of his skin every time you touch him. Always strive for a positive interaction between you and your equine. Keep an eye on your equine while you're working with him. Watch his face. He'll let you know if he's experiencing pleasure or discomfort. If you observe wrinkling around his mouth, or if his ears are laid flat back, or if he's stomping a foot, he's showing displeasure. A soft eye, a relaxed, contented, chewing mouth, absence of tension in his body denotes pleasure. So when you're engaged in training, pay special attention to your equine's body language and adjust your own touch accordingly. Work on evolving your own body language as natural and truly wonderful in a talking way with your equine. You can also use the verbal language, but our body language is primarily important in communication with equines. Making use of your equine's five senses to expand the meaning and benefit of imprinting can really work in your favor, and it will leave an indelible impression on your equine's brain that will engage his attention and expedite the learning process. You spend a lot longer at the front with all this groundwork and spending time in leading training particularly, and then later lunging and ground driving, which just that in itself is going to take you a whole year. But be willing to do it. It's going to be a fun year. You're going to learn how to appreciate the little victories along the way, because now you're going to have these illuminating moments where you're going, oh my God, he's talking to me. Oh my God, this is going so easy. And this is developing the most resistance-free relationship you will ever have. And it's deep, it's meaningful, and it's not just momentary, but it lasts for the rest of his life. When you take the time to do this, you're going to have a deeper bonding with him. You're going to have a more attentive partner. He's going to be a safer and more deliberate in his foot placement on the trail rides. He's going to be a smoother ride. His transitions are going to be smoother. His lead changes are going to be smoother. He's going to have better times when he's practicing gymkhana or even showing in gymkhana. He's going to have better showing in the pleasure classes. He's going to have increased agility and alacrity over jumps. He's going to be more correct in his movement overall. He's going to have a quicker and more smooth response time. He's in reining and cattle classes. He's going to be right on the money. He's going to be able to keep up with those cattle. He's going to be right there cutting them. He's going to know how to cut them back and do it smoothly, so even the cows and the cattle and the steers aren't moving abruptly. And in the reining classes, his stops, if you don't overdo it and drill, his sliding stops are going to be absolutely beautiful, as are his spins and his flying lead changes. And all of this is a lot more impressive to a judge, because a real judge is going to be able to recognize that you took the time to put that animal in his ideal equine posture, and his movement is going to be impeccable. That's all I got to say.
That's it?
Pretty much it.
Oh,
You know?
this is awesome. This has been a fabulous episode. This is just exactly what I needed to hear.
Good. And anybody can do this, because you're going slow enough to implement it. And then you begin to realize that it's not that you don't need a trainer. It's that you need to be the trainer.
Yeah.
You need to participate in the trainer.
Yeah.
And you need your trainer as a guide and a coach.
Yes, very well said.
And everything that we're talking about here today can be found in my books, Training Mules and Donkeys, A Logical Approach to Long Ears, Training Without Resistance, Equine Management and Donkey Training, Equus Revisited, and A Guide to Raising and Showing Mules, and all of my video series.
Meredith Hodges' website is lucky3ranch.com, and 3 is spelled out. Her number is 1-800-816-7566. Meredith answers all her calls.
Gotta go. My mule is looking for me.
Mule Talk is an Every Cowgirl's Dream production.